Hi.
Hello, beautiful people.
What a way to start.
I know, right?
Hello. I hope where you are today in America, you are safe and warm and dry. I know that here in Texas, we're having quite a bit of winter storm issues, not so much on the coast, but definitely everyone in North Texas is snowed in. So, how are things where you are, Kyra?
Weirdly, so there's still very much evidence of the fact that we've been smacked by all that is winter, but if the sun is out and there are like patches of green showing, so it's like, does today look like the middle of March, but next week look like the middle of like all that is pain and wintry? Yes. That's just it's just the weather swings, you know?
Classic January 31st.
Truly.
Speaking of January 31st,
It is the final day for submitting your draft manuscript to sort of join this illustrious odyssey of the launch of Manuscripts Press. So if you are interested in submitting your manuscript to us, I'm going to drop the link inside the chat. In essence, here we go. Thank y'all for your patience. Again, this is the last day to submit via this form. Manuscripts Press is going to be around for a while, so there will be other opportunities to submit. But if you want to submit with our inaugural cohort as Manuscripts Press, because there are plenty of other cohorts within the broader manuscripts ecosystem, this is what you would submit to.
And yes, that was going to be my follow-up question, Kyra, was what if I'm an author and I'm just simply not ready to submit?
Well, don't worry. You're not alone in that. I mean, first and foremost, it doesn't necessarily hurt to submit if you have something that could be considered done, but you feel like it's rough. It doesn't hurt to submit and get some initial professional feedback on it. But if you feel like you haven't reached to a point where your manuscript articulates the entire plot of your book or it isn't complete, then I would definitely recommend holding back and submitting at a later time so that you could at least get feedback on something that shares the entire trajectory of your work.
Thank you.
Of course. So as sort of a debrief of what we've talked about over these live streams so far, I mean, of course, we're so excited to read all of your work, but why would you want to publish with us as a hybrid publisher?
Yes. So first thing we want to kind of address / readdress / if you're watching this for the first time and you haven't seen any of the other videos, totally fine. Who are we and what is hybrid publishing? So the question really is, who is Manuscripts? If you're wondering who we are, hello, I'm Mackenzie Finkley.
Oh, right. I'm Kyra Ann Dawkins. I guess we didn't introduce ourselves.
we both work at Manuscripts Press in different capacities. Kyra primarily works in instruction and I primarily work in growth, partnerships, book tours, events, etc. So we work on kind of two different ends of where Kyra's more with authors in the beginning and I'm more with authors at the end when they are finished and have published their books. But the idea is that Manuscripts Press and the other presses within the ecosystem it's hybrid publishing, which is you want to publish your book, but you don't want to self-publish it completely by yourself and you want to find all of the services in one place. We are that place. So that is what happens after you submit your manuscript and you get your initial feedback from some lovely editorial staff. And if you get a publishing offer, you get to move through and start on your journey. So you can hire our services, but there's a quality threshold. People will review your manuscripts. Not every manuscript gets through, but if your manuscript does not get through the first time, fret not. You will get feedback to help improve your work and try again next time, should you want to continue to work with us. So that is my general overview. Kyra, is there anything I missed? Anything you would like to add?
Well, I think that I concur with all aforementioned statements. Another thing that makes our process, like probably one of the biggest strengths of our process, is the fact that you are, again, plugged into a broader community. So again, we are the ones, like a one-stop shop, so to speak, in bringing your book goals into fruition. But you also, while you're getting one-on-one coaching services and in cultivating your book and product, you're also working alongside other authors in doing so. So
Yep.
The process is completely tailored to you and your needs, but you also know that no man is an island, so to speak.
Right.
And this process reminds you of that in ways that other service opportunities wouldn't emphasize in the same way.
Yes. Same storm, different ships. It's always good to know that someone else is going through the same thing you are, and celebrating each other's big wins, all things that are lovely about the writing community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, as you guys are considering submitting your manuscripts to us, trust us, we are very good stewards of your work. And as Mackenzie and I have actually both gone through this process, so
Mhm.
we can attest to the thrills and chills of it all. But amidst the journey is worth it, because on the other end, you are going to become published authors, and that's going to be true for you for the rest of your lives. And author
Yay!
journeys are something that, and once you have your book with us in this community, we're not, quote, done with you. You could still engage with a broad manuscripts alumni apparatus. Now, but with all that being said, if you are interested in submitting your manuscript to us, there will be a couple of questions that you'll see on there that you might not necessarily expect. So one of the questions that we ask you is whether or not you intend on producing an audiobook with your book. So you might ask the question, like, why does Manuscripts need to know if you intend to publish an audiobook? Well, there are kind of two main reasons behind that. First, we want to know from a audience development standpoint, because different audiences resonate with different formats. Most people, when they think of a book, particularly in traditional publishing sense, they think of paperbacks and hardbacks first. But especially ever since the pandemic, audiobooks have become increasingly popular, just increasingly popular. And the people who read audiobooks, there's an overlap for sure, but there's a slightly different demographic that skews towards audiobooks versus reading physical books. There are some people who are absolutely enamored with collecting physical copies, whereas there are other people who are absolutely enamored with having certain narrators bring certain stories to life. I'm somebody who has equal loves for both of them, but inside of my own work, I probably lean more towards audiobook obsession. I do love them both. What would you say, Mackenzie?
I like audiobooks, I think, for the reason probably why they became so popular, which is I can listen to them while doing other things.
Mhm.
Turning it on while cleaning the house is a personal favorite, or walking the dog is also another good one. Not something that's too distracting where I'm not actually listening to the book, but something that still makes the book kind of background noise. Like,
Right.
I will admit, it's not totally active listening. So not every book is meant to be an audiobook, at least for me.
Facts.
But yeah, I do like reading books in all different formats. As we were talking, I had a question that came up. And by the way, if
Mhm.
any of you have questions as we're talking, drop them in the chat. My question that came up is, why might audience be relevant knowledge for manuscripts when you say, hey, I want to do an audiobook?
So, audience would be relevant in the sense that if you know what audience you want to target, then you have a sense of how you want to cultivate your author branding. So, for example, there are, to your point, a huge benefit of audiobooks is accessibility. Accessibility might resonate more for the new parent than it would for a teenager. It depends on how you want to spin it, but when you have your ideal reader in mind, what value does an audiobook or a particular book format give to that specific person? So it's really all
Yeah.
about audience cultivation and how different formats fit into the lives of your ideal reader. So that's
Yeah, it
important to
definitely forces
consider.
authors to think critically about whether or not they want to invest their time and money, because that's what it
Mhm.
does cost,
Yes.
into producing an audiobook, whether or not it would be something that would be appealing to their audience. Otherwise, I mean, you can make an audiobook just for the sake of making audiobook. We're not going to stop you.
Right,
But
exactly.
it is important to think critically in making that decision.
Right. Another thing to bear in mind too, and that kind of gets into the second point around audiobook development, is because you also, to what you just said, Mackenzie, want to think about the resources it would take to create an audiobook. Now, within our process, authors have, usually taken one of two approaches. They've either recorded the audiobook themselves with guidance from our team, or they have hired narrators to bring their books to life. Either way, we offer guidance within our ecosystem, but the cost breakdown is going to look a little bit different. And the way in which those logistics come to fruition is going to be a little bit different depending on the route that you choose. But if you know you want an audiobook, you could start to think about those questions now so that when the time comes, you don't have to make those decisions all at once.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we want to ask the question in advance.
Yep. And speaking of other editions, another thing we want to cover is audiobooks versus hardcovers. And of course, talk about other editions that are offered. So when you submit, definitely what you're submitting for, first and foremost, is paperback, paperback, and ebook. Those are 100%. You join the publishing process, you are 100% doing those two editions. Kyra, what are other options for authors to consider?
So we have, again, paperback and ebook. We have hardcover books. We have audiobooks. We have illustrated editions. We have like special edition hardcover books. We also have
translations, right?
We have translations, and we have, this isn't quite the same as an audiobook, but we do have an internal program for audio shows, which is when you generate content based off of your book in an audio format. So all of those are available. Again, this distinction between audiobooks versus hardcovers, or determining which formats you want to prioritize in, again, funding and emphasis, really does depend on your audience. If your ideal reader is somebody who likes to collect the special edition hardcovers, then you might want to prioritize a hardcover over an audiobook. But if your ideal reader is a busy parent pushing their child around in a stroller, then you might want to prioritize the audiobook. So
yes.
All of these things can be options for you, but it's just a matter of what you know you would want first. But the paperback and ebook, as Mackenzie said, is a guarantee.
The paperbook and e-back.
Yes, the paperbook and e-back.
I will say, in looking at my book in particular, to use my book as an example, a book about museums. Now, as much as I wanted my target audience to be younger people and get younger people excited about museums, that is not who ended up being my ideal reader, as one might imagine. My ideal and typical reader was in a slightly older demographic, and I've even had some of them come to me and say, "Oh, I only want the hardcover. I don't buy paperbacks." And I'm like, okay, you do you. It's a collection. It's beautiful. It lasts longer. It's they have all their different reasons, or it looks good on the shelf with all the other hardcovers that they have. Versus audiobooks have not been as popular with my audience because that's a more of a tech savvy technology, let's say technology forward edition that is less popular with the demographic who typically reads my book.
I kind of had a similar experience, but kind of more of the inverse. I found that the audiobook partially because my mom rants and raves about it. But my audiobook is probably the most popular amongst my audience, in part because my book is inspired by oral history. So I knew that I wanted for the oral component to play a huge role in my book anyway. And something that my mom, again, sort of jokes about, and other people inside my audience will say, is the language of my book is easier to follow when it's being read aloud to them, which was kind of what I was going for. I was hoping that the book felt like it was being read to you as you were reading it. So when the audiobook really brought this to fruition, that was in alignment with my author goals. So again, I still found that, kind of like what Mackenzie was saying, that my ideal audience ended up being different than what I was expecting, but that audience still proved to lean more to audiobooks being in line with my book's messaging.
Amazing. Yeah. How perfect is it that we had two perspectives on each end? I mean,
I know, right? Man. It's alignment, truly.
You would think that we planned it that way.
Yeah, you would have never guessed. But another thing that we just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of as you're navigating this decision to submit to us, and again, we are very biased towards you making the decision to do so. We just want to be upfront about that from the gate. But something else we want to be transparent with you guys about is why Manuscripts does charge more for higher word counts, and why generally the first draft tends to be wordier than necessary. So here's the thing. Within our ecosystem, the manuscripts that are 60K and less are more or less a fixed price. And then beyond 60K, every 10,000 beyond 60K, there's an additional fee incurred. And it's going to depend on which cohort you join. Now, with that being said, part of the reason why that is the case is because of the amount of time that needs to be allocated to your editing process. Yes. So if it's 60K or less, you are allotted at least 8 weeks of revisions. But if it's 60K or more, you need to have at least 16 weeks of revisions. And that's just how our editing team prioritizes who has access to generating the book content and publishing when, because we don't want to batch too many editors being spread too thin, because we want to make sure that the editor that gets assigned to you is able to give as much feedback to you as possible.
And that you have enough time to go through all of your work.
Exactly, because some of the manuscripts we've received so far are closer to, I guess, the length of my book, which was like a longer novella in the 35-40,000 range. And some of you have submitted manuscripts that are like 120,000 words. So 120,000 word book is definitely going to be a bigger beast than a 40K book. So that's just something to consider. Now, another
thing. Hey, go you. Right, good job for writing that many words.
I know, right? But another thing to bear in mind is that oftentimes a first draft. So say, for example, you're submitting a first draft to us that is 70,000 words. If you are concerned about the additional cost of what 70K would be versus 60K, initial first drafts tend to be wordier than the final product, because we found that creative authors tend to word dump and need to strip back versus add more most of the time. It's a little bit different for our nonfiction peers. Our nonfiction peers tend to skew needing to add more content on. With that being said, you can collaborate with your editor to get your book within the word parameters that you want, and that is what you will be charged for. The final production of the word count that your book ends up being. Now, this is within reason. Like, it wouldn't necessarily be realistic to say that your 100,000 word book could be stripped down to 60K. Within reason, there's like a 10,000 word like grace period. So if you submit something that's 80K and you could vouch for bringing it down to 70K, we're willing to work with you within that pricing parameter. What are your thoughts on this, Mackenzie?
Mostly that I agree with all aforementioned statements. It does tend to, your first draft tends to be wordier. It's also, in my experience with writing a novel, your first draft tends to be wordier because you're telling the reader a lot more than they need to know, because it's all in your brain, but sometimes there's information that needs to be withheld, saved for book 2 maybe, or not necessarily divulged all at once. The other thing too is, like, have you ever seen those commercials or ads for Grammarly where literally, you write an email and you write 3 sentences and it really only needs to be one sentence, practicing being more concise. So that's just like what Kyra was saying in terms of like doing a word dump and then realizing, I was a little redundant there and there are ways to edit down. And then lo and behold, you went from 70,000 words down to 58,000, and there you go. You're in the sweet spot.
Yeah, beautifully said. So it does look like we have a question in the chat from Samuel. So a question we have in the chat is, so the first part of the question is, what are your views on lit RPG stories? And the follow-up to that would be, how would you handle that specific subgenre as a novel submission? So We do have some submissions within this category in the past. Admittedly, I don't have expertise in the subgenre, but we do have editors that do have expertise. So they would be able to give you some insight onto how to best format it and align that within the formatting parameters that we have inside of Manuscripts. Another thing
the answer. You go ahead.
Another thing that we have available in the event that you're interested in this is lit RPG stories have also worked really well as serialized content we've seen. And we actually have a internal serial boot camp. Of course, we would encourage, sort of encapsulating everything into a beautiful novel. But if that is something you're interested in as well, stay tuned because we'll have more content about that in the future. What were you saying, Mackenzie?
I was going to say the good news answer to this question is we have a variety of editors with a variety of different experiences and specialties in different genres and subgenres. And so your submission will get paired with the editor best fit to review your work and provide feedback.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Beautifully said. I don't see any other questions inside of our comment section. But
I don't either. But there's always we are available. You can find us on Instagram at manuscripts.ed. You can find myself on Instagram at author M. Finkley. And Kyra, what about you?
And you can find me on Instagram at Kyra_and_writes. So thank you all so much for joining us. That was like nice and swift. And I hope that you guys learned so much. Do not hesitate to drop any further questions, comments, concerns, confessions in the comment section below. And thank you so much for joining us for this live stream series. We're excited to read your work here at Manuscripts and to work with you guys here with me on the instruction side and with the iconic Mackenzie Finkley.
And the later part. The part once it's published.
Once your book is published. Well,
yes, and if you do ask a question in the chat, we will in the comments below after we post, we will come back and review them. Worry not. So good luck with submissions today.
Yes, let me just drop that link for your interest one more time.
Boom.
Bam. And do not hesitate to share your work with us and share your work with the world. And start to think about who your ideal reader is. That's probably my parting advice. Because you're not just writing this book for yourself. You're writing this book to be enjoyed by the world and to start the conversations you've always wanted to have.
Amazing. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.